On the afternoon of November the 13th, 1909, a fire broke out deep inside a coal mine near the small town of Cherry, Illinois. At first, the smoke seemed manageable, but within hours, the tunnels filled with deadly gas and thick black smoke, trapping hundreds of miners underground. Some would escape. Others would remain trapped below the earth for days as rescuers struggled to reach them. In the early years of the 20th century, coal mining was one of the most important industries in the American Midwest. Railroads, factories, and cities depended on coal for heat and power, and thousands of miners worked underground across Illinois to supply it. Many of those mines were located near small towns that had grown up around the industry itself. One of those towns was Cherry, Illinois. Cherry was a mining community in Bureau County, where the St. Paul Coal Company operated a large coal mine beneath the farmland surrounding the town. Like many mining towns of the time, Cherry revolved almost entirely around the mine. Miners and their families lived in nearby houses and boarding homes. Shops, churches, and schools served the workers who descended underground each day. Many of the miners were immigrants or the sons of immigrants who had come to the region looking for steady work. Underground, they spent long hours cutting coal from the earth, working by lantern light in tunnels supported by timber beams. The work was difficult and dangerous, but it was also routine. Each morning, crews entered the mine through a vertical shaft that lowered them deep beneath the ground. From there, they moved through a network of tunnels stretching far below the fields and homes of the town above. On November the 13th, 1909, hundreds of miners and support workers were underground in the Cherry mine, moving through the tunnels and continuing the ordinary work of the day. Not far above them, the town of Cherry carried on with its usual routines. Few people had reason to think anything unusual was happening beneath their feet, until smoke began to appear inside the mine. On the afternoon of November 13th, 1909, work was continuing inside the Cherry mine, much as it did on any other day. Miners moved through the tunnels, cutting coal and loading it into small rail cars that carried the fuel back toward the main shaft. Deeper in the mine, a group of workers noticed smoke beginning to drift through one of the passages. At first, the problem did not seem serious. Fires inside coal mines were not unheard of, and crews were trained to respond quickly by isolating the flames and preventing them from spreading through the tunnels. But this fire had begun in a dangerous place. Some accounts later suggested that a hay-filled cart used to carry mules may have caught fire near the mine's main shaft. Others believed the flames may have started near electrical wiring or lantern equipment. Whatever the cause, the fire soon began producing thick smoke that spread through the underground passages. Miners working deeper in the tunnels started noticing the air changing. The smell of smoke drifted through the mine, followed by the heavy darkness that came as the flames consumed oxygen inside the narrow passages. Above ground, the first signs of trouble began to reach the town of Cherry. Workers near the mine entrance realized that smoke was rising from the shaft. Word spread quickly through the nearby streets. Families of the miners began gathering outside the mine, trying to understand what had happened below. At first, many believed the fire would soon be brought under control, but underground, conditions were already beginning to change. The smoke continued to spread, and in the tunnels beneath the town, hundreds of miners were now trying to find their way through a mine that was slowly filling with fire and gas. As the fire continued burning inside the cherry mine, smoke and toxic gases began spreading through the underground passages. Miners working deeper in the tunnels realized the situation was becoming more dangerous. Some crews immediately began moving toward the main shafts, hoping to reach the elevators that carried workers to the surface. But the smoke was already thickening inside parts of the mine. In several areas, visibility dropped until the tunnels were almost completely dark. Miners moved carefully through the passages, trying to find their way toward fresh air while avoiding the sections where the fire was spreading. Above ground, the situation was becoming more urgent. By late afternoon, hundreds of people had gathered outside the mine entrance. Families waited for news while mine officials and rescue crews began organizing efforts to reach the trapped workers. Engineers and supervisors faced a difficult decision. If the fire continued spreading through the mine, it could ignite coal dust and cause an explosion that might destroy the entire structure. In an attempt to control the fire, crews began lowering materials into the shaft to try to isolate the flames and block the flow of air feeding the fire. Underground, some groups of miners managed to reach escape routes and were brought to the surface. Others continued searching for ways out through the maze of tunnels. As the smoke spread deeper through the mine, conditions became increasingly dangerous. Rescue crews worked through the night above ground, lowering equipment and organizing teams that attempted to descend into the mine. But every hour that passed made the situation below more uncertain. Some miners had escaped. Many others remained somewhere in the darkness beneath the town. As the fire continued burning inside the cherry mine, conditions underground became increasingly dangerous. Thick smoke and poisonous gases spread through the tunnels, making it nearly impossible for rescue crews to move safely through large sections of the mine. Engineers and mine officials eventually made a difficult decision. In an effort to starve the fire of oxygen and prevent an explosion, parts of the mine were sealed. The decision was intended to contain the flames, but it also meant that many of the miners who had not yet reached the surface were now cut off deep underground. Above ground, the town of Cherry waited. Families gathered near the mine entrance and along the nearby streets, hoping for news about the men who had not yet returned. Rescue crews continued working, but the fire and heavy smoke made it difficult to reach the deepest sections of the mine. As the days passed, hope began to fade. Many believed that the remaining miners had been overcome by smoke and gas in the tunnels below. The fire continued burning inside the mine for several days before it was finally brought under control. When rescue teams eventually began moving deeper into the mine again, they expected to find only silence. Instead, they found something else. In one section of the tunnels, a group of miners had managed to seal themselves inside a small chamber where fresh air still remained. They had been trapped underground for days. Working together, the men had used boards, cloth, and mud to block the smoke from entering their refuge. When rescuers finally reached them, the miners were weak and exhausted, but still alive. Their survival became one of the few hopeful moments in a disaster that had otherwise brought overwhelming loss to the town of Cherry. In the days after the fire was finally brought under control, the town of Cherry began to understand the full weight of what had happened beneath the ground. Rescue crews continued searching through the mine's tunnels, bringing survivors to the surface when they could, and recovering those who had not escaped the smoke and gas. By the time the rescue efforts ended, the disaster had claimed the lives of 259 miners and workers. For a town built around a single mine, the loss was devastating. Families mourned fathers, sons, and brothers who had gone underground that morning, expecting an ordinary day of work. The Cherry Mine disaster soon became one of the deadliest mining tragedies in the history of the United States. Investigations that followed examined the conditions inside the mine and the decisions made during the fire. Questions were raised about safety practices, equipment, and the risks miners faced every time they descended into the earth. In the years that followed, the disaster contributed to growing calls for stronger mine safety laws and better protections for workers across the country. But for the people of Cherry, the memory of the disaster was not only about laws or investigations. It was about the day when smoke began rising from the mine shaft and the town gathered outside, waiting for news from the darkness below. Across the United States, thousands of miners continued descending into tunnels beneath mountains, fields, and towns, much like Cherry. The work remained dangerous. The risks remained real, and in mining communities across the country, people understood that every shift underground carried the same quiet uncertainty. Men entered the earth each morning, trusting that the tunnels above them would hold. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they did not. That was tonight's story. You've been listening to The Midnight Box. Wherever you are, thank you for listening. Good night.